Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this training. It sounds like we have a really great group on the phone with a really varied level of experience advocating in Olympia, which is fantastic. So today I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of the state legislative session and talk about what a bill is and how do you transform a really great idea into a law. Also, how can you advocate and influence your lawmakers to pass laws that you're in support of or to not pass laws that you don't like. And then I'm going to spend some time talking about testimony. It sounds like a lot of veteran parents have been in Olympia busy testifying, which is fabulous. And there are going to be many more opportunities this session to testify. So we'll touch on some best practices if you're working on writing your first testimony, or maybe you want some tips on how to improve. And then at the end, there's going to be a section, just some time for those of you on the phone who've done this before and have a lot of experience to share some tips that I didn't cover that have worked really well for you. So I'm going to encourage all of you, if you have a question, please feel free to either type it in or interrupt me and ask. And I'm happy to rephrase something another way or touch on something a second time. And then I'm going to ask you just to, if you have a comment or a suggestion, a tip that really worked well for you, to write it down so you remember it and save it for the end during our Tips from Veteran Parents section. So I'm going to jump right into just a brief overview of the state legislative session. So in Washington State, we have a legislature, as many of you know, that is made up of state senators and state representatives. And they meet in Olympia every winter to build the state budget and to pass bills and pass laws in Washington State. So this year, they are meeting from January 13th to March 13th. So it's a very short session this year, only 60 days. We're about halfway through session right now, so I think today is officially the halfway mark, actually. During odd years, 2015, for example, 2013, the legislature meets for a little bit longer amount of time. They meet for 105 days. And then even years like 2014, they meet just for a short period, 60 days. And the reason why this switches every other year is because during odd years, or those long 105-day legislative sessions, the legislature works to build the state's $34 billion operating budget. And so the state's operating budget is a 2-year budget. And then during even years, like this year, they pass supplemental budgets. So they just make little tweaks to the budget. They don't build a brand new budget, but for example, if there's more kids entering kindergarten, then the schools are going to need a little bit of extra money. And so state lawmakers will use the supplemental budget to make just small adjustments. So it's a very short session, and it happens, they meet every year in the Olympia, the state capital, and it's a really exciting time. If you think about, one vote by the state legislature can result in a bill or funding proposal that affects 6 million people in Washington State. So their work is very important, and most importantly, it's really, really important that they're hearing from constituents such as yourselves who have important experience and expertise to share, particularly around family issues, issues around the child welfare system. So they're making educated decisions. They're making decisions about policies that really address needs in the communities and are helping strengthen families. So just to go into who represents you, the state is divided into 49 different legislative districts, and every single one of you just lives in one of those legislative districts. Each district elects 1 senator and 2 state representatives. So there's the state Senate and the state House of Representatives. I have a link on this if you don't know who represents you. you can go to the link on the bottom of this slide and type in your address, and the web page will generate your legislative district, and it'll tell you who your senator is and who your two representatives are. And it's a really great tool because it lists their office phone number, their office address, and their email address, as well as a link to their biography. So you can really research who's your senator, who are your representatives, what's their background, how long have they served the state in Olympia, and most importantly, how do you get a hold of them so they know you are one of their constituents, and so you can tell them what issues you care about, what you'd like to see the state prioritize during the legislative session. So definitely I encourage you to look your legislators up if you don't know who they are, so you can start to get to know them, build a relationship, and make sure you're represented in Olympia. Any questions about this slide? All right, well, I'm gonna take a step backwards before talking about what's happening in Olympia right now, just giving a little bit of background information about how, if you at the veteran parent meetings identify an issue that needs to be addressed, how do you translate into a law? It's a long process, but it's one that's very, very accessible that this group can absolutely engage in and achieve a law as an outcome. So if you're in your meetings and there's an opportunity or a problem that just really emerges, oh, if only there was a law that would do this, or if only there was money for a program that would accomplish this. If you have a great idea, you can absolutely work on that to create a and a law. And a couple things that you would want to think about if you want to introduce a bill is your good idea. Is it something that requires a state, federal, or local solution? So that's an important thing to think about when you're in Olympia, because the state legislature only addresses state-level issues. So some issues like immigration reform, for example, or military policy, state lawmakers have very little influence over that because those are decisions made by the federal government. Same with local school districts or local law enforcement agencies. Many of the local policies those decisions are made by local city council members. So the first thing to think about when you have an idea is, would a state-level solution address this problem or address this opportunity? And if your answer is yes, then what you'll want to start doing is meeting as early as possible. Earlier I mentioned that the legislative session ends on March 13th. If you have a great idea that you want to see turned into a law, I would start talking about that late spring. Start coming together and really narrowing down what is our proposal. Figuring out what the scope of it would be, who it would affect, what it would do, and then how much it would cost. And it typically takes about 6 to 9 months to develop a bill. And what a bill is a proposal to change the law, and it's something that the legislature considers and takes a vote on, and then the governor has to sign it for it to officially become a law. So one thing about a bill, a question I frequently get is, well, who can introduce a bill? And the answer is only a state lawmaker. So it has to be a state senator or a state representative who introduces a bill. So if you want to translate your good idea into a bill, the first step is to think it all the way through. So what's your good idea? How much would it cost? What would it do? Who would it affect? And then you need to go out and make a relationship with a lawmaker and ask them to sponsor a bill. So for example, if Governor Inslee, the governor of Washington, if he has a good idea he can't sponsor his own bill. What he does, he'll go to Representative Kagi or Cody and say, will you sponsor and introduce this bill for me? And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. And then what you do is you work with the lawmaker during probably the fall before the legislature convenes in Olympia, and you work with their staff members to write a bill. So you don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be a technical expert to write a bill. If you are working in partnership with a lawmaker, they have a legal staff to help do the technical piece of drafting a bill. So if you go through that process and you have a bill ready for by January 13th, the first day of the legislative session, then you can proceed with dropping a bill. And I'm going to talk about that process in a minute. That's the overview of what you would need to do during the legislative interim. So the interim is the period when the legislature is back in their home districts and not in Olympia. What you would need to think about to put a bill together. Now, if you're thinking, wow, it sounds like a lot of work to find a lawmaker to sponsor a bill, where would I even start? I'm going to go back to that first slide. Who represents you? So you have one senator and two representatives, and their job is to represent their constituents. If you have a great idea for a bill, definitely call up your lawmakers, make an appointment. They'll meet you for a cup of coffee when they're not in Olympia, and you can talk to them about your idea. So everybody on this call has 3 people whose job it is to listen to you and to consider your ideas. So that's an exciting place to start. Okay, any questions about how an idea becomes a law? I'm going to jump into the bill process in a minute, but anything about that basic background information? One other thing I'll add is that it often takes about 3 to 5 years to pass a law. So to take something from a good idea to a law, it's a long process. It takes a couple years sometimes to really educate lawmakers about the problems and why your good idea and your bill is a solution. But the payoff is really, really wonderful. When you pass a law, it immediately affects 6 million people. So it is a long-term process, but it's one that's well worth engaging in. So what I'm going to do, if there's no other questions, I'm going to talk about the stage when you have your good idea. You've been working with a lawmaker all summer and fall, and you have a bill. You worked with their staff, and they have officially drafted up a legislative bill. The very first thing you have to do is introduce your bill into the legislature. And the shorthand is called Drop the Bill. In this picture right here, this is of Representative Steve Berquist, who is a state representative. He's a 12th grade government teacher out of the 11th district, which is Renton, part of South and South Seattle, Beacon Hill. So what he's doing right now, you see this piece of paper? That's a physical bill right there, and he's dropping it into this box called the hopper. And this picture was taken in the code revisor's office, and this is how you drop a bill. You get your draft, and you drop it in this box. And once you drop it in this box, it's officially introduced, and it's officially a bill, and has the opportunity to go through the legislative process. So that's what it looks like right there, to drop a bill. Any questions about that? All right, so once you drop a bill, the legislature will take a look at your bill and see what it's about. They'll see, okay, is this bill about human services? Is it about education? Is it about the economy or technology? Is it about the environment? And what they'll do, there's a series of policy committees in the Senate and the House. And every year there's about 2,500 bills that are introduced to the legislature, which is a lot of information and a lot of work. So if you think about this, 60 days to consider 2,500 bills. How does the legislature actually pass anything? Well, this is how they do it. They divide up the work. So what they do, they break themselves into policy committees. And these are committees of lawmakers who specialize in a certain subject area, such as education, human services, corrections, law and justice issues. And when a bill is introduced, the first thing they do is say, okay, we're going to read the bill, and aha, this bill is related to housing issues. We're going to refer it to the policy committee that works on housing issues. So first you introduce a bill, and then secondly, it's introduced to a specific policy committee. Now, one thing I want to just point out, that you'll notice it says House of Representatives right here. This process that I'm going through is identical in both of the House of Representatives and the Senate. So you can introduce a bill to the House of Representatives, or you can just introduce a bill to the Senate, or you can introduce one to both. Regardless of where a bill starts, it goes through the exact same process. But for simplicity's sake, this specific example is just related to the House of Representatives because it's easier to visualize one house at a time. But I just wanted to note that for your background information. So when a bill is referred to a policy committee, you can see this is what a committee hearing looks like right here. You see all the lawmakers, they're sitting here. And then there's a table, and there's somebody here testifying. Usually this guy here in the front, that's where the committee chair sits. So they'll hold a public hearing where they invite people who have an opinion about the bill to come testify. And the people who come and testify, there'll be people who have direct experience with the issue, technical experts, different stakeholders, and people will have 2 minutes to testify. And it sounds like a lot of you have done this before. This is a wonderful opportunity for veteran parents to make sure their voices are heard during the state legislative process. And they'll make arguments for and against the bill. This is why we want you to pass this bill. This is why we don't like this bill and think you shouldn't pass it. So after the public hearing, every bill has to have a public hearing, and lawmakers will hear both sides of the issue. Then they'll have a vote, and they either can vote to pass the bill out of the policy committee to the next step of the legislative process, or they can vote to not pass it, and then the bill essentially it's considered dead. It's not going to move any further during this legislative process. So the next step, if your policy committee or if your bill has any fiscal impact, if it would cost the state money or save the state money, it goes to the fiscal committee. And the fiscal committee, it's just a committee of lawmakers, and they deal with money issues. So they're not looking necessarily to whether your bill is a good policy or not, but more, what's the cost benefit of this policy? If the state has a limited number of resources, is this policy, is the cost benefit of the policy really a priority this year? So this committee will hold another public hearing, and it's another opportunity for stakeholders like yourselves to testify and make the case why this program or policy is so important that it's worth the cost to the state. And then what they do after the hearing, they will take a vote and either pass the bill to the next step, or they'll vote to not pass the bill, and then the bill will be considered dead. Any questions about the fiscal committee? So in the House of Representatives, the fiscal committee is called the Appropriations Committee, and in the Senate, it's called the Ways and Means Committee. So sometimes they have different names in the House and Senate. So the next step of the legislative process, if your bill passes out of the fiscal committee, first of all, you celebrate, made it through 3 steps, woohoo! It goes to the Rules Committee. This is a picture of a rules room. It's just a table with a lot of chairs. The Rules Committee is kind of a special committee. It's like a gas pedal. So the gas pedal and the brake. So the Rules Committee is in charge of controlling the flow of bills to the House of Representatives or to the Senate floor. So they get to decide, okay, so your bill passed both committees. Are we going to let it go for a full vote onto the House of Representatives? And so maybe they decide, today we're gonna vote on 10 bills or 20 bills or 5 bills. So what they'll do is they pull a vote. They'll vote to pull a vote out of the Rules Committee and allow it to come up for a vote on the House floor. So there's no opportunity. These are open to the public. You're welcome to go and witness a Rules Committee hearing, but there's no opportunity for public testimony. So you can't testify. However, what you can do, sometimes a bill will sit in Rules Committee for several weeks. You can call and email lawmakers who serve on the Rules Committee and say, hey, this bill is sitting in the Rules Committee and it's a really important bill. This is why I think it's important. I urge you to pull it out of Rules as soon as possible. That's a great ask of the Rules Committee. So now, if your Rules Committee, if it pulls your bill out, what that means is that it's sending it to the House or Senate floor. So this is what it looks like. This is a picture of the Senate right here. And these are all the individual lawmakers. They have a little desk and a microphone. In the Senate, that's the Brad Owens, Lieutenant Governor, and he presides over the Senate and facilitates all their discussion and their bills. So if a bill comes up, he'll bring it in front of all 49 members that gets pulled out of Rules and say, okay, we're going to bring up this bill. And first we'll have an opening for comments. Does anybody want to make a speech? Any lawmakers want to make a speech for a bill or against a bill? And so they'll have what's called a floor debate, and the Senates who are in support will say, I urge all of my colleagues to vote for this bill because it's going to address this issue and it's really important and it's critical we pass this now. And people who oppose the bill will say, I urge my colleagues to not pass this bill. I don't think this is the right solution to the problem, and here's why. And after they're done debating, all 49 senators, or all, if it's in the House of Representatives, all 98 representatives will vote on the bill. And so what happens next, if a bill passes out of the House of Representatives, it is referred to the Senate. And it has to start at the very beginning of the process and go through it all over again in the Senate. If it passes the Senate, it has to go back to the House of Representatives and go through the entire process all over again. So every single bill that passes the legislature has to go through the same process twice in order to become a bill. And remember, this is all in 60 days, if you can believe that. So it's a very, very fast process. So just to run through it really quickly, if your bill has passed the House of Representatives, it goes to the Senate Policy Committee. And there's another public hearing, another opportunity to testify. And then if the Policy Committee passes it out, it goes to the Senate Fiscal Committee. There'll be another public hearing and another opportunity to testify. And then if it passes that, it goes to the Senate Rules Committee. And if the Senate Rules Committee pulls it to the Senate floor for the entire Senate to vote on, then it's delivered to Governor Inslee's desk. And Governor Inslee can either sign a bill into law or veto a bill. And then it dies and doesn't become a law. So this is a picture of Governor Inslee signing a bill. So let me tell you a little bit where we're at right now in the legislative process. We're about halfway through, and today is the deadline for all bills to get out of it's called the House of Origin Fiscal Committee. So if it's a House bill, it has to get out of the House Fiscal Committee by today, or else it's dead. If it's a Senate bill, it has to get out of the Senate Fiscal Committee by today, or else it's considered to be dead. What's going to happen next, all the bills that can make it through this deadline go to House rules. And they have to be voted out of the House of Representatives, if it's a House bill, or out of the Senate, if it's a Senate bill, by next Tuesday, February 18th, in order to be considered, in order to move forward. So the next big deadline is the 18th. All bills that make it through the 18th are going to go to the opposite house. So if it's a Senate bill, it's going to go to the House of Representatives. It's a House bill, it's going to go to the Senate, and it's going to have to go through this entire policy process again. So in a couple of weeks, there's going to be another round of policy hearings and another round of opportunities for veteran parents to go to Olympia to testify. So, so what's going to happen if our bills, if they get passed out of the House of Representatives by the 18th, goes to the policy committee. It has to be out of the policy committee by February 28th. So what you can anticipate, the last week of February is going to have a lot of policy hearings and a lot of opportunities to testify. If there's a fiscal note to that bill, it's going to have to be out of the fiscal committee by March 3rd. So again, a lot of hearings that last week of February, beginning of March. It has to be, so then it goes to the Rules Committee, and it has to be voted off of the Senate floor by March 7th in order to become a law. The one exception is if the bill does something to raise revenue. And then it's considered necessary to implement the budget. And it has to be passed off the floor for a Senate vote by March 13th, or the last day of session. So March is going to be a really, really busy month with 2 new rounds of policy committee hearings. So that's where we're at. That's a lot of information I just went over. Does anybody have any questions about that? So there's one other special kind of bill I want to touch on really quickly, and that's the state budget. So most programs, there's 3 different budgets in the state of Washington. There's a transportation budget, and that's the budget that funds the building of roads, transportation infrastructure, light rails. There's a capital budget. The capital budget funds state buildings. So it's money to build schools, it's money to build affordable housing, it's money to build prisons and jails, state hospitals, any government building or any building that uses government money, that comes out of the capital budget. And then there's the state operating budget. And that's probably where most of, I'm going to guess, most of the items that veteran parents work on are probably going to be operating budget measures. And that's, the operating budget is $34 billion, and that funds everything from schools to health care, TANF, food assistance, social services, all sorts of really important programs come out of the operating budget. And what a budget is just a really, 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 really big bill. It's a bill that's about 500 pages. And it kind of has its own special process. We're probably going to see the budgets start. The Senate introduces a budget, and the House introduces a budget. And they will start introducing their budgets the week of February 24th. And what happens to a budget bill? Since it's just fiscal policy, it's not a policy issue, it skips this step and goes straight to the fiscal committee. So it'll be introduced to the fiscal committee, there'll be a public hearing, and it's a really important time to testify. And then it has to go to the Rules Committee and be voted by the Senate. Same in the House. The budget will probably be introduced again the week of February 24th. We don't have the exact date, but that's what everybody's anticipating. And it's it's introduced directly to the House Fiscal Committee, and then goes to the Rules Committee, and then is voted on. And then just like any other bill, Governor Inslee has to sign the budget bill into law, and that authorizes that $34 billion to be spent on all sorts of programs. So that's how the budget fits into that. So as you can see, the next 30 days are going to be very, very busy in Olympia. There's a lot of policy bills and there's the budget to pass still. So lawmakers have a very full plate, and that means that there's a lot of opportunities for all of you to influence what bills and what the budget is that gets signed into law by Governor Inslee. Any question about the legislative process?
Hi, Kate. This is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
Yeah. When veteran parents or anybody testifies, there's so many different committees to be testifying at. Is it okay if they give the exact same testimony each time, or should it be something different, or how does that all work?
That's a great question.
Hang up again. Unmute.
It's okay to use the same testimony for the same bill because there's going to be different lawmakers hearing your testimony. So there might be different, so if you see there's two different committees that a bill would go through, it's a different set of lawmakers on a policy committee and the fiscal committee. And then in the House of Representatives, let's see here. House of Representatives is going to have an entirely different set of lawmakers. So there's going to be 4 different sets of lawmakers that you can testify in front of. So I would say it's absolutely okay to use the same testimony. Elise is tracking all this information in detail, so she might have some tips about, hey, the Ways and Means hearing there's going to be a lot of bills, so maybe you want to shorten your testimony a little bit for that. So maybe there's a lawmaker who's really interested in one aspect of people's stories, so maybe to emphasize a little bit more of that. So somebody like Elise, who's really tracking that carefully, will have that information. But generally, it's totally fine to use the same testimony. Any other questions? All right. Well, now that there's all these things going on that are really, really, really important, how the heck do you influence them? And can you influence them? I get this question a lot. Wow, 2,500 bills, 148 lawmakers. Is it possible or 147 lawmakers, how can one person really make a difference in raising their voice, talking to lawmakers, or testifying? And the answer is absolutely, absolutely. The wonderful thing about state government is that compared to the federal government, it's relatively small. And it's very, very, very accessible. If you're in Olympia, you can walk up to your lawmaker's office, and if they're available, they'll have a conversation with you. They'll meet with you. If you call in advance, they'll absolutely meet with you. So you can easily build a relationship once you have the tools with your lawmaker and tell them how you feel about different pieces of legislation and make sure they understand where they're coming from. Now, can you imagine, do you think anybody could be the expert on 2,500 bills? The answer is no. No way. There are bills introduced that most lawmakers know very, very little about. As veteran parents, all of you are experts in certain issues. If you have experience, real life experience with a public policy, you have expertise that your lawmaker doesn't have. And if you share that with them, they'll find that really, really powerful and helpful to better understand an issue and really understand what a bill does. One example of this is I was involved with a lawmaker meeting where a constituent who was receiving Working Connections child care talked to her lawmaker about how the income limit, how she had to turn down a promotion in order to stay eligible for subsidized child care, and how that was keeping her from really getting ahead. And this lawmaker was somebody who's always supported Working Connections child care, but he never really got in front of the issue and really was a champion and advocated and pushed other lawmakers to vote for an issue. And he couldn't believe her story. He was shocked that that's the kind of situation people in his district were facing. The very next day, a Working Connections child care bill got pulled to the Senate floor. He stood up and gave a floor speech and talked about this woman's story, who he had heard the day before, and wasn't planning on giving a floor speech beforehand, was somebody who was generally good on the issue, but definitely not a champion, and he urged all of his Senate colleagues to vote on the bill. And that was just hearing from one single person who shared her story at a meeting with a lawmaker. So meeting with lawmakers absolutely will change their perspective, it will educate them, and it will influence the process. Another story that I like to share is there was a lawmaker down in southwestern Washington who read a story in the newspaper about one of his constituents who was struggling to find housing. And just reading that one article in the newspaper caused him to write a bill to address the issue, and that bill passed. So, imagine scheduling a meeting with your lawmaker and sitting down with them and really walking them through a problem. It can be very motivating and might raise their awareness about an issue that they weren't familiar with, because it's impossible to be an expert on so many issues. So it's absolutely critical that people in the community who have real-life experience bring up concerns and opportunities to legislators so we can make sure laws in Washington and the budget in Washington truly address the needs of Washington's families. So advocacy absolutely works, and it only takes 10 emails or phone calls before a lawmaker starts to call the Housing Alliance and ask us for more information. So really, it's this little, one lawmaker gets 10 phone calls, it gets an issue on their radar, they want more information. So it is a pretty accessible place. So there are several things you can do right now in the next 30 days to influence the legislative process. If you have a trip to Olympia planned, absolutely schedule a meeting with your lawmakers. And if you've never done that before, at least can you provide support for people if they want to meet with lawmakers?
Yeah, that's going to be one of our objectives, is getting, learning from Kate that when we're down in Olympia, we can potentially try to set appointments with our lawmakers beforehand. So those are some of the things we're starting to learn more about, but definitely in the process of.
So if you have an opportunity to be in Olympia during the legislative session, call Elise, and she can help you, and I can also help you schedule a meeting with your lawmakers so you can sit down with them and share your story. If you can't make it to Olympia, I know there's a lot of people who live in Spokane, for example, which is very far away from Olympia. That's not a problem. You can still get a hold of you. You can still leave a message for your lawmakers, and the quickest and easiest way is calling the legislative hotline, which is right here, 1-800-562-6000. This is a toll-free hotline that's open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturday. You can call, and an operator will answer the phone, and you can leave a message, just one message, and the operator will deliver it to the governor, the lieutenant governor, your state senator, and both of your representatives. This takes about 2 minutes to do, so if there's a bill and it's coming up for a vote and you want to get a hold of your lawmaker, you're short on time, just enter that cell phone. I have it in my cell phone, that phone number. Just give it a quick call, leave a message. It's very short, sweet, and easy. What you can expect, the operator will ask for your address, and that's just to verify which legislative district you live in, so they send your message to the right lawmaker. You can also email your lawmaker. One really easy way to do that on housing issues, for example, is going to Washington Low Income Housing Alliance's website. That's right there, and you can sign up for action alerts. And what we'll do every time a bill comes up for a vote, we send an email to everybody on our email list and with a sample message and a tool that will look up your lawmakers for you. So it makes it really, really easy. You can also, going back to that very first slide, if you look up your lawmaker's address, you can email them yourself or call them or send them a letter. One of the most important things you can do is testify at a public hearing and share your personal story and your expertise with the policy committee. And I'm going to go into that in depth because there's a lot of opportunities coming up. Any question about this slide? All right, let me do it on time. Okay, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because we're starting to kind of get short on time. But a public hearing, I've already talked a little bit about what those are all about, so I'll skip that bullet. But what you can expect is you have 2 minutes to talk at a public hearing. So it's an opportunity to sit in front of a policy committee of lawmakers, and you are sign in beforehand. And if you email Elise, if you can make it down to testify, she can help you figure out how to coordinate that. And you go up and sit at the stand, and you have 2 minutes to testify. And what I really encourage folks to do is to write out your testimony in advance. It's a little bit, if you've never testified before, it could be a little nerve-wracking, although lawmakers are very kind to constituents and do a good job listening and are very respectful. But, with just 2 minutes to testify, you want to make sure you're covering the most important parts of your personal story and also including a legislative ask, asking lawmakers to pass the bill. So I have an outline here of how to prepare testimony. And I've broken it up into 5 paragraphs. And the first bullet under each section has just some background information, just what you should include in each paragraph. And then the second bullet is an example of testimony from a veteran parent who gave me permission to include her testimony in this presentation, named Leela Bynum. And so you can see her testimony and see an example of what a good testimony looks like. So the very first thing you want to do is introduce yourself. That's short and sweet, saying who you are and what bill you're here to testify on. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but there's an example here, so hopefully that'll help. But feel free to email me afterwards if you have any follow-up questions. And this will be available. This will be sent out. So definitely start with a quick introduction, who you are, what issue you're here to speak about, and what your position on the bill is. The second paragraph is sharing your personal background. All of us, we have a long personal background, and the most common mistake I see people do in public hearings is sharing too much of their background and running out of time, and then never getting to the point of their testimony. So when you're putting together some background, think about what's the most relevant pieces of your background that provide some context for why you're testifying today. So it doesn't need to be every single detail, but just the most important pieces that are really relevant to the bill. And I just say that so you don't get cut off, so you have an opportunity to testify for the full 2 minutes. The third paragraph is going to be why do you support or oppose the bill. So why is this bill good? Why is this bill bad? The fourth paragraph, why is this bill a priority? So this is, really, I think, probably the most important paragraph. Why should the legislature pass this bill this year? And this is where it's really good to go into details about how an issue would really impact you on a personal level or your family on a personal level. And you can see this with Leela's testimony. this is about the Fair Tenant Screening Act, she really talks about how the high cost of repeat tenant screening fees has negatively impacted her family. And that really moved the committee in understanding why this issue is a problem and why it's important to have a bill. And the last paragraph, paragraph 5, is a closing statement. So it's just a brief summary of your position, and then just asking, saying, please vote yes or no on the bill, depending on what your position is, and then thanking the committee for their time. So pretty short and sweet. My rule of thumb is a 2-minute testimony. When I'm writing testimony for myself, it's a page and a half with 0.5 margin, so half-inch margins, and 14-point font double space. That's every time I do that for my pace of speaking, that gets me a 2-minute testimony. So that's double-spaced, 14-point font, a page and a half-inch margins. Any questions about testifying? All right, so do we have time still, Elise, for?
Yeah, I mean, if we know that we're definitely a little bit over time, but if there's some veteran parents that are on the phone / webinar today that would like to provide any tips from their experience of testifying, we'd love to hear a couple of those things.
Hello, this is Heather. I don't really have anything to ask, but I need to get to the survey point so I can get someone that can consider back.
Do you want to do the survey?
Can I maybe do that?
Yeah, let's do that.
Can't do it.
Oh.
You finish.
Later? Okay.
But I can always email it to you.
Will you email it to me?
Sure.
I so appreciate that. I thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm really multitasking here, but I'm so glad I was a part of it. And I'll just stay on the line now and give her computer back.
Great. Thank you,
Cool.
Heather.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
So does anybody else have tips, anything that's worked really well from you, or something you learned while advocating in Olympia that you'd like to share with the group?
This is Jeremiah, and I learned often there's a lot of other bills that people are supporting that are there, and there's other people that are there and supporting your bill, and it helps sometimes to talk to them and maybe get some feedback on your testimony if you're a little bit worried about what you might say, and they can give you some insight. So.
Awesome. And this is Elise. I've learned to sit next to those that we're partnering with. For instance, Stacy, Lori Leopold's intern, she's down there, or if we happen to be going down on a bill that Kate might be working on, or Nancy Ashley, I've learned to sit by them because sometimes you'll hear that the hearings are getting cut short, that each testimony segment is reduced. And so, for instance, last time I was at the Senate last week, and we found out we only had 10 minutes for the whole bill to be heard. And so by sitting next to those that are supporting, we were able to quickly remove points of my testimony so I wouldn't go over, and it helped with the stress of the moment, right? And it ended up going really well. So that's something I've learned to be able to deal with the on-the-fly moments that happen down in the legislature.
Great tip.
Shane or Gina, do you guys have anything you want to chime in on?
No, I'm good.
So this is Ken. I mean, you really it's really intimidating. Even if you've rehearsed the mental health public speaking and stuff, it seems to be intimidating just because you're the legislator when you legislate, when you go up there and speak. But I think that helps make it real. You know, when you're testifying, and I don't know. I kind of like not really rehearsing like my testimony too much, so that there was a lot of emotion attached to it, and I thought that they well appreciated that. And then the other thing that I kind of missed out on the last time I was down there was when I was signing in. I could have signed in pro on several other bills that I heard that day. And I mean, we have a contact person down in Olympia now, and I think that we just, for whoever's going to be going down testifying in the future, that we find out what other bills we're in support of that might be being heard that day, so that we can sign in on, not wishing to testify, but in support.
That's great.
Those are two good points. And just to address your first point about it being a little intimidating, it can absolutely be. And my piece of advice for that is to get there early and to meet somebody who is a veteran in Olympia, and make sure you know where to sign in and what to expect, and that can really help make it a little less intimidating if you're there and you have enough time to kind of absorb the surroundings and the process. And then in terms, the last piece, what was the last piece, the last point?
Being able to sign in as pro but not testify.
Yes. What you can do is look up the hearing in advance, and if you were to email, Elise or something, or myself, we could help look up what other bills are being heard, so you could look at them in advance and think about if you want to sign in pro but not to testify.
And we have Stacy down there who loved Shane's idea and is definitely able to help connect VPs with that information, and to meet veteran parents when they come down to make sure they're signed in correctly and stuff. So that's why it's always good for us to know when VPs are down there, so we can make sure you have everything you need.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for your time, and I'm gonna. That concludes my presentation.